Have you ever imagined discovering too late that a mother's silence hid the family's biggest secret? In this story, a forgotten will reveal truths no amount of money can buy, and show that sometimes love speaks louder after goodbyes. Stay until the end. What happens in the last few words may change the way you understand what true inheritance is. The sky in the countryside dawned overcast, as if in mourning. The dirt road led to the past with dusty footsteps. Clara adjusted her sunglasses and didn't look to the side. Eduardo drove in silence, chewing over bitter memories. Livia hugged her mother's coat as if holding back time. The farm gate creaked a weary welcome. The tall grass kissed the knee and hid the path. The house reeked of damp wood and stale coffee in the air. Yellowed photographs watched the room like sentries. Everything there seemed to tell a story that hurt. Clara walked steadily, her heels sounding like hammers. He made mental lists, numbers, deadlines, necessary reforms, profits. I preferred spreadsheets to feelings, accounts to memories. Eduardo kicked a stone and looked away from her. Livia stopped in the garden and took a deep breath, almost crying. The neighbors spoke softly, respecting the distance. The wake was simple, said Donna Rosa, offering cake. She asked about you, he added, touching Livia's arm. Clara thanked him with a short, dry, formal smile. Eduardo pretended to answer a call and walked away. In the empty room, the made bed seemed to be waiting for someone. The scent of lavender soap still lingered there. Livia sat up and gently smoothed the sheet. Clara opened the window to let the air circulate. Eduardo remained at the door, hands in his pockets, restless. The wall clock chimed stubbornly 5 times. Each chime recalled a discussion forgotten in time. I can't believe we came back for this, Eduardo muttered. We're here to resolve, not to remember, Clara interrupted. Livia just closed her eyes, holding her breath. In the hallway, Donna Helena's portrait smiled subtly. There was a firmness in that smile, a silent affection. Clara looked away as if she was burning inside. Eduardo stared at the painting and apologized for his thoughts. Livia whispered, "Mom," and lightly touched the frame. The lawyer, Dr. Alvaro, confirmed the meeting for tomorrow. He spoke in a lukewarm voice, like someone who had seen it all. Rest easy, the reading is early, he informed, putting away the folder. Clara nodded, calculating schedules, costs, future possibilities. Eduardo wanted to drink, but decided to just walk alone. Night fell heavily, scattering crickets throughout the yard. The wind whistled in the eaves like a naughty child. Clara reviewed messages and ignored persistent reminders. Livia lit a candle in the living room's oratory. Eduardo looked at the stars, trying to remember good times. Before going to sleep, the three exchanged tired glances. No one knew what to say, only silence spoke. The past sat with them at the empty table. The house breathed like an old but firm chest, and the dawn kept silent. What would come next? The morning brought a pale, shy sun on the tiles. The smell of fresh coffee wafted up the stairs. Dr. Alvaro arrived punctually, with a discreet tie and light steps. He placed the folder on the table carefully. Clara arranged chairs like someone who organizes destinies. Let's begin, said the lawyer, adjusting his glasses. The wood creaked under every breath held there. Eduardo drummed his fingers, impatient with protocol. Livia held a rosary that she didn't usually use. Clara kept her chin up and her heart closed. The will began with loving and firm words. Donna Helena was grateful for every noisy and happy childhood. It was the most precious thing I had, he said. A pause weighed on the room like lead. Livia already had tears in her eyes, without any shame. There are conditions for sharing, continued Dr. Alvaro. Clara crossed her arms, staring at the document impassively. The 7-day period on the farm is mandatory. Eduardo snorted, staring out the window with weary disdain. Livia nodded as if expecting something similar. The tasks were listed in neat handwriting. Take care of the garden, clean the room, prepare your plate. Simple things. loaded with symbols and deep memories. Clara wrote it down without lifting her head from the notebook. Eduardo let out a short laugh, without any joy. There was also mention of recordings on old tapes, messages left by the mother, delicately dated. "They will be played at night, one at a time," he explained. Livia smiled sadly, imagining the voice calling, "My children." Clara bit her lip, dreading what she would hear. Dr. Alvaro took another long, respectful pause. "Sincere fulfillment of tasks is an essential condition. Pretense nullifies the right to receive any good." The sentence fell like a stone in the middle of the room. Eduardo finally straightened up, now a little serious. The lawyer then carefully closed the folder. "I recommend you start with the fourth one today." Clara agreed, delegating duties as an experienced manager. Livia asked to choose the flowers from the garden. Eduardo agreed to lower the boxes, muttering softly, resigned. At the end, Dr. Alvaro handed over a small key. "There is a safe, to be opened on the seventh day." The words sounded like a riddle packaged in wood. Clara put the key in her pocket, her hand closed. Livia felt a shiver that she couldn't explain. As he said goodbye, the lawyer looked them in the eye. "She believed in you until her last breath." The door closed slowly, without any nervous clicks. The silence returned, filled with voices that hurt, and the weak began to tell the truth, mercilessly. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, dragging with it the last thread of heat. The house was plunged into darkness, and the sound of crickets filled the gaps of silence. Clara collected plates with mechanical gestures without looking at anyone. Eduardo leafed through an old magazine, distracted, trying to ignore the discomfort. Livia was preparing tea, the aroma of chamomile softening the tense air. The dinner conversation had been short and tasteless. They talked about practical things, bills, deadlines, renovations, inheritances. But beneath every word lived an echo of ancient hurt. Eduardo couldn't stand Livia's disapproving look. Clara feigned normality, but impatience throbbed in her jaw. When the clock struck 9, the light flashed twice. A metallic click came from the bookshelf, followed by a snap. A cassette tape began to spin on an old recorder. The scratching sound brought a sweet, firm voice. "My children!" Clara's blood ran cold. Eduardo stopped breathing. "If you are listening to this, it is because I have already left." Her mother's voice seemed to come from the walls and from the memories. "I didn't leave gold. I left what really matters." Livia put her hand to her mouth, crying softly. Clara stood up, as if the voice was a call. "You forgot me, but I never stopped loving you." The recorder crackled. The tape seemed alive, almost pulsating. Eduardo narrowed his eyes, overcome with silent shame. Clara crossed her arms, stiffening, but her gaze wavered. The mother's voice continued, soft, like a sad lullaby. "For 7 days, I want you to remember what we were. The smell of the bread we baked, the laughter in the backyard. Every task has a piece of what we lost. And on the 7th day, you will hear my last word." The final hiss sounded like a sigh, locked in time. The silence that followed was heavy, almost physical. Livia sobbed uncontrollably. Eduardo looked away. Clara, motionless, seemed made of ancient stone and pride. "It's just a recording, nothing more," he muttered lamely. But inside, something in her had begun to crack. Edward got up and opened the window to breathe. The wind blew in, spreading the smell of wet earth and memories. "Maybe we should try to do what she asked," said Livia. Clara laughed shortly, bitterly. "Why? She's not even here anymore." "Perhaps more so than ever," the sister replied firmly. The clock struck 10 as a warning that time was running out. The tape stopped, but the echo of the voice remained. Clara collected the recorder, locking it in the drawer. Eduardo went out to smoke, needing the darkness as a refuge. Livia was left alone, looking at her mother's smiling portrait. Outside, the moon watched everything with maternal coldness. The farm slept, but every room breathed awakened memories. The first night of the will had ended, and something bigger had begun. In the children's chests, longing was mixed with guilt, and the mother's silence echoed louder than any words. The next morning, light timidly entered through the cracks in the window. Livia was already standing, her hair tied up, her gaze determined. "Today we start with her room," he announced firmly at the table. Eduardo let out a long sigh without any desire. Clara just nodded, drinking coffee as bitter as her mood. The hallway leading to the room smelled of stored memories. The walls still displayed portraits and embroidery from her mother's youth. The door latch seemed to hesitate under Livia's hand. When he pushed, the air that came out was heavy and sweet. That was the last intact piece of Donna Helena. The sun cut through the space, illuminating folded sheets and flowered bedspreads. At the head of the bed, a rosary hung swaying in the wind. On the dressing table, a comb with white threads rested. Livia touched the furniture as if caressing a wound. Eduardo kept his distance, afraid of what he would feel. "Let's start with the drawers," Clara said, looking for practicality. He opened the first one and found handkerchiefs, beads, small notes. In the second, there were folded letters tied with blue ribbon. Clara's name written on the first one made his heart skip a beat. She hesitated, but Livia asked, "Read, please." The mother's shaky handwriting filled the room with silence. "My daughter, I don't know if you still think about me. I write to remind you that, even from a distance, I loved you every day. You taught me that pride is heavy armor. I hope one day you take it off and hug me again." Clara couldn't finish. Her voice broke off halfway through. Eduardo looked away, feeling a knot form in his chest. Livia cried openly, wiping her face with her apron. Time seemed to stop for a few seconds. Even the wind remained quiet, respecting that moment. Under the bed, Eduardo found a shoebox. Inside, more letters, but these were addressed to him. "Son, I know money separated us, but I forgive you. You inherited my genius, my stubbornness, and my faith. Use this to find yourself again." Eduardo dropped the box and knelt on the floor. The tears came without permission, hot, shameful, liberating. Clara looked at him, and for the first time she didn't feel angry. That room seemed to purge years of silence and guilt. The mother's presence was almost palpable, alive among them. Livia collected the letters and organized them carefully. "She wrote to everyone, even me," he whispered. On her envelope, just one sentence, "You have always been my heart." The simplicity of the words broke what little control he had left. The three hugged each other between sobs and regret. When they left the room, the air seemed lighter. The sun came in fully, warming the space again. The letters remained on the bed like silent witnesses. Clara looked back and murmured, "Sorry, Mom." The first forgiveness had finally been said out loud. Dawn arrived, coloring the sky orange and gray. Livia was already outside, shovel in hand. The garden looked forgotten, covered in weeds and dry branches. There one day, Donna Helena had planted flowers with her young children. Now, only the smell of the earth reminded him of what had once been life. Clara watched from afar, arms crossed, posture restrained. Eduardo approached, wearing gloves and a resigned expression. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, pushing the hoe. Livia looked at the two of them hopefully and pointed to the central flower bed. "She always said that flowers come back when we believe." The sound of iron cutting the ground broke the silence. Each shovelful of dirt seemed to dig more than just soil. It dug memories. Eduardo remembered when he used to spray water with a hose and laugh. Clara remembered the smell of the roses she hated to care for, and Livia just smiled as if she found her mother again in every page. As they cleaned the space, the sun began to warm their faces. Sweat mixed with dust and fatigue, but also with emotion. Eduardo found an old plant label with the name Hope. He showed it to Clara, who smiled without realizing it. That word echoed inside her for a long time. She said that the garden was the soul of the house, recalled Livia. Clara responded in a low tone, almost like a rant, and we let the soul die along with it. Eduardo nodded, looking at the ground as if seeking forgiveness. For a moment the work was heavy with unspoken feelings. After hours, the garden began to be reborn. The old flowers, even though fragile, resisted in timid buds. Livia brought new seedlings and planted them carefully. Eduardo replaced the old fence that the wind had blown down. Clara cleaned the stone where her mother's bench still stood, waiting for someone. When they stopped to rest, the wind blew gently. The scent of jasmine filled the air, sweet and familiar. Livia closed her eyes and swore she heard her mother's voice. Caring is remembering that love flourishes even in oblivion. Clara felt a lump rise in her throat and looked away. Eduardo silently picked up a small, broken shoot. He buried it gently, whispering, "I'm sorry, Mom." Livia smiled through her tears, feeling her invisible presence. The sun now shone brightly, illuminating the new garden. It seemed like Donna Helena was looking from somewhere, satisfied. When they returned to the house, Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "A task accomplished," he said, but his voice trembled slightly. Eduardo laughed, "Perhaps the most important of all." Livia agreed, holding the necklace she had inherited from her mother. Deep down, they knew that garden wasn't just dirt, it was reconciliation. On the balcony, they watched the sunset turn everything golden. The same gold that once separated them now looked different. The house exuded the scent of flowers and memories. Clara leaned against the railing and took a deep breath. The will was not yet finished, but the heart was beginning to open. The next day, Dr. Alvaro returned to the farm with a box. He said that was Donna Helena's next instruction. She asked that they watch it together, later this afternoon. Clara raised her eyebrow curiously, but kept her distance. Livia picked up the box carefully, as if holding something alive. When they opened it, they found an old album with a faded blue cover. The fabric smelled of mothballs and time. The pages creaked, filled with black and white portraits. Eduardo smiled when he saw a photo of himself as a child, with mud on his feet. Livia laughed through her tears, recognizing her childhood dog. Every page seemed to speak. The mother smiled at all of them, even the simplest ones. One portrait showed Clara as a teenager, holding her school diploma. Another showed Donna Helena sewing old clothes by lamplight. Her love was there, in every gesture frozen on paper. In the middle of the album, a folded sheet caught the eye. Eduardo opened it carefully. It was a handwritten letter, for when you look back and recognize yourselves. The words seemed to speak to what they were experiencing now. Clara swallowed hard and asked Livia to read it out loud. "My children, photographs hold what words cannot say. If you ever open this album, it will be because you understand the value of time. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it prevents it from festering." Livia was trembling, her voice trembling, her heart tight. Eduardo wiped his face, hiding his emotion. At the end of the letter, one detail was surprising. There was a small photograph taped to it with old tape. It showed an unknown woman next to Donna Helena. On the back, an enigmatic phrase, "To her, I owe my peace." Clara frowned, intrigued by that presence. "Who could this woman be?" asked Eduardo thoughtfully. Livia shook her head without answering. Clara felt a sudden chill creep up her body. Maybe someone who took care of her when we didn't. The words came out sharp, full of regret. They decided to keep the album on the coffee table as a symbol. Dr. Alvaro watched them, satisfied with what he saw. "A will doesn't always mention assets," he commented discreetly. "Sometimes it speaks of who we are." Clara remained silent, absorbing this. When the lawyer said goodbye, the sun was already setting. The album was left open in the last photo, where the three of them were smiling together. Livia closed the cover slowly, almost reverently. "Looks like she's still here," he murmured. Eduardo replied, "Maybe he never left." That night, the next tape was waiting in the recorder. The scratching sound filled the room again, like an echo. "My children, there are still truths that need to be told." The mother's voice now sounded deeper, more determined. And on the other side of the tape, something was beginning to change forever. The mother's voice echoed through the recorder, soft and firm. "Not everything you believe is true, my children. There are secrets I've kept to protect you and myself." The silence in the room was almost sacred, tense and expectant. Clara pressed her fingers against the edge of the chair, unblinking. "Among you, there is one who does not carry my blood." The tape made a dry noise, as if choking on emotion. Livia's eyes widened, her heart racing. Eduardo slowly turned to his older sister. Clara froze. The air seemed to drain from the room. "But who does she mean?" murmured Livia. Clara stood up suddenly, her eyes furious. "It must be you. You've always been the darling, haven't you?" Eduardo intervened, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Don't say that, Clara. Wait until the end." But the tape stopped there, without explanation, interrupting the revelation. The silence screamed inside each of them. Clara unplugged the recorder, frustrated and furious. Livia cried, feeling a fear she couldn't name. Eduardo just stared at the floor in shock. Dr. Alvaro was called back to the farm that night. After reviewing the content, he confirmed the tape ended abruptly. "Maybe she left another part somewhere else," he suggested. Clara demanded answers, but the lawyer denied knowing more. "Everything I received, I delivered exactly as ordered." The climate became unbearable. Clara accused Livia of being another woman's daughter. Eduardo tried to calm things down, but resentment boiled in every sentence. "She never treated you like she treated us," Clara shouted. Livia, crying, just said, "She loved me the same, that's enough." In the early morning, Eduardo went down to drink water and heard something. The record player in the living room was spinning by itself, with no one around. On the piece of furniture, a previously non-existent letter lay folded. On the envelope, just 2 handwritten words, "For the truth." Fear and curiosity mixed in his chest. He called the sisters, and together they opened the letter. "My children, if you have come this far, it is time to find out. Not all ties are of blood, some are of choice." Livia is the one who reads with a trembling voice. "And the choice I made was out of love." The words become more direct. "Livia was not born of me, but she is the daughter that destiny gave me." Clara drops the paper as if it were burning. Eduardo feels hot tears escape his eyes. Livia covers her face, overcome with shock and emotion. The truth at last was told, but relief did not come. Clara left the room without saying anything, her steps firm and cold. Eduardo tried to reach her, but she locked herself in the room. Livia knelt before the letter, crying silently. Outside, the wind blew, as if their mother were watching them. The next morning dawned grey, heavy with resentment. Clara didn't show up for coffee, and Eduardo barely spoke. Livia tried to remain calm, but her heart ached. The words from the night before echoed like thunder in his mind. "I was not born of her, but I loved her as if I had been." Dr. Alvaro arrived unexpectedly, bringing a sealed envelope. "I found this among her old papers." The handwriting on the back read, "For when they know the truth." Clara came down the stairs, cold and distant but curious. Livia trembled, holding the paper as if holding fate. Inside was a photograph and a final letter. In the photo, Donna Helena smiled next to a woman with kind eyes. In the letter, the words were full of tenderness and regret. "Livia is the daughter of Marta, the nurse who saved my life. When she left, I promised to raise the girl as my own." The revelation fell like a storm between them. Clara took a step back, stunned, her pride in tatters. "So, she's been lying to us her whole life?" Eduardo replied with sad calm. No, she gave us another sister. Livia just cried, feeling loved and lost at the same time. Clara exploded, her voice echoing through the house. This is all manipulation. Even dead, she still controls. Eduardo held her arm, asking her to breathe, but she broke away, overcome with anger and hurt. You don't understand. I just wish she would choose me. The words revealed what Clara had been trying to hide for years. It wasn't greed, it was need, a love denied out of pride. Livia, even though she was injured, approached her and hugged her. For a moment, Clara stood still. Then she broke down, in tears. It was the first true gesture of affection between the two. Dr. Alvaro watched in silence, moved. She said that the truth sets you free, but it hurts before it heals. Eduardo nodded, discreetly wiping his face. Clara took a deep breath and apologized to her sister. I was blind, Livia, too blind to see love. While they were talking, they heard a sound coming from upstairs. In his mother's old office, a radio played by itself. The same familiar voice echoed, serene and distant. Now that the truth has been told, follow my heart. And the radio turned off, as if it had fulfilled its mission. The brothers looked at each other, a mixture of fear and comfort. Livia wiped away her tears and smiled lightly. She always found a way to be around. Eduardo laughed, moved. Not even death could silence this woman. Even Clara smiled shyly for the first time in years. Peace, fragile and new, began to emerge in the house. The resentment still existed, but now mixed with forgiveness. Outside, the garden was blooming more than ever. Each petal seemed like a word of reconciliation, and the will still had more secrets to reveal. The afternoon arrived sultry, the sky a leaden hue. The silence on the farm was no longer heavy. It was tense. Clara tried to work on something, but she couldn't concentrate. Eduardo tended the garden, distracted, finding peace in the land. Livia read the old letters, trying to understand her mother again. It was then that they heard the sound of a car at the gate. A simple white vehicle parked slowly. An elderly woman got out, her steps slow and firm, her grey hair tied in a bun and her kind gaze. Livia recognized it first. It's Marta, she whispered. The nurse walked onto the porch with a serene smile. Sorry to show up like this. She asked me to come. Clara watched her suspiciously, her heart racing. Eduardo stepped forward, offering to help with the heavy bag. Marta thanked him and looked at the house with silent nostalgia. I haven't set foot here in years, she said emotionally, but she left something with me, and only now can I give it to her. From the bag, he took out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. On the back, written in firm handwriting, open only on the 7th day. Livia brought her hand to her mouth, feeling the weight of the moment. Clara crossed her arms, her tone as stern as ever. More secrets? Isn't the theater over yet? Marta took a deep breath, not taking offense. Not everything that hurts is a lie, my daughter. Eduardo intervened. Let her speak, Clara, just listen. Marta told about Donna Helena's last days, how the mother spoke of her children with pride and sadness, how he wrote letters every night even when he was sick, and how, just before he died, he held her hand and said, "Take my truth to them when they are ready." Marta's eyes filled with unshed tears. She loved you more than you know. And he made me promise that I would only bring this letter when there was forgiveness. Clara looked away, swallowing hard. Livia cried softly, touching her mother's necklace. Eduardo asked hesitantly, "What if we're not ready yet?" Marta smiled, with the wisdom that time teaches. She knew they would be. The heart always comes home. After that, he asked to rest a little and went to his room. The scent of lavender accompanied her slow steps down the hallway. On the balcony, the wind swayed the old curtains. Clara stared at the envelope on the table. 7 days. It seems like she wants to test us until the end, Eduardo replied in a calm voice. Or he wants to cure us, finally. Livia looked at the darkening sky. Maybe both. When night fell, Marta was already asleep in the old guest room. The distant sound of crickets and wind rocked the house. On the clock, the hours seemed to pass slowly, waiting for something. The will still held one last truth. And in the distance, thunder announced that the 7th day was approaching. The next dawn brought dark clouds and the smell of a storm. Clara woke up early, driven by anxiety and foreboding. Eduardo was coming down the stairs when he heard the sound of arguing. Livia and Marta were talking in the kitchen, her sister's voice rising in pitch. "You knew all of this and never told anyone?" shouted Livia. Marta, serene, replied, "It wasn't my truth to tell." But the young woman insisted, tears falling uncontrollably. "You let me grow up thinking I was her daughter. And it was my daughter. In heart, not in womb." The words hit the air like thunder louder than rain. Clara walked into the kitchen, her gaze icy and hard. "So it's true, you and she plotted together?" Marta sighed, tired but firm. "She didn't plot anything. She loved. And that bothers you." Eduardo in the corner asked for calm, without success. Clara stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Do you think it's nice to hide lies in the name of love?" Marta looked at her, her eyes teary but full of courage. "I saw your mother die crying because she didn't have your forgiveness." Those words were like blades in Clara's heart. The argument spread through the house like wildfire. Eduardo shouted that enough was enough, that they were losing their meaning. Livia ran out into the garden, overcome with despair. Marta sat down, exhausted, muttering soft prayers. Clara stood still, trembling between anger and regret. Outside, the sky broke into heavy rain. Livia knelt on the ground, her dress soaked and cold. "Why so much pain, Mother? Wasn't it supposed to be love?" The water mixed with the tears, washing away the guilt of years. Eduardo ran to her, pulling her back inside. Inside the house, the wind blew the windows open, pictures fell, and a photograph slid to the floor. It was an image of Donna Helena and Marta, hugging and smiling. On the back, a sentence in blue ink, "Friendship is the blood of the soul." Clara took the portrait and stared at it for several long seconds. Eduardo approached and touched her shoulder. "Maybe we never understood what she tried to teach." Clara took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears for the first time. "She just wanted us to love each other, didn't she?" "Yes," replied Eduardo, "and there's still time." Marta reappeared, holding the 7th day envelope. "She asked me to deliver it when the sky spoke." Livia, still trembling, asked, "And did he speak?" Marta smiled, pointing to the rain falling outside. "He's talking now." The envelope was placed on the table, wet at the edges. The 3 hands, Clara, Eduardo, and Livia, touched it together. For a moment, time seemed to stop inside the house. Outside, thunder roared like a divine signal. Donna Helena's last truth was about to be revealed. The storm roared like a beast outside. The light flickered on the ancient walls, casting dancing shadows. The envelope lay on the table, untouched, sacred. No one dared to open it yet. Fear and anticipation mingled. Marta watched in silence, her hands folded in her lap. "Today is the 7th day," said Eduardo, his voice almost a whisper. Livia looked out the window, where lightning flashed across the sky. Clara walked in circles, restless, feeling the weight of the moment. "What if it's something that changes everything again?" he asked hesitantly. Marta responded calmly, "The truth never destroys, it only reveals." When the clock struck 9 o'clock, something strange happened. A crackling sound from the wall. Mother's old clock began to chime. a sound that hadn't been heard for years, marking lost time. Clara approached and noticed a small key hanging from the pendulum, the same key that had been mentioned by the lawyer. Eduardo took the envelope and read the back again. To open what has been locked by silence. Livia understood first. Her safe in the garden. Marta nodded, her eyes welling up with remembrance. The key to what she couldn't say in life. The four of them went out into the rain, carrying flashlights and the envelope. The wind whipped through her hair and clothes, the mud under her feet. They reached the center of the garden, where their mother's old bench had stood. There, the earth looked like it had been disturbed recently. She brought us here, Livia murmured, kneeling down. Eduardo began to dig with his hands, not caring about the rain. Soon the shovel touched something hard, an aged iron box. Clara knelt beside him, her heart racing. The key fit perfectly into the lock. The metallic click seemed to echo into the past. Inside the safe, there was only a new album and a smaller envelope. The album had a leather cover with the name My Children recorded. The pages were filled with recent photos, all taken by Marta. Livia cried when she saw her mother's face in the last few days, still smiling. Clara looked away, overcome by a mixture of love and guilt. Eduardo opened the smaller envelope with trembling hands. Inside, a single letter with recognizable handwriting. If you are reading this, it means you listened to me until the end. I left no gold, no land. I left memories. And the request that you remember each other with tenderness. The letter ended with a sentence that made everyone fall silent. Love doesn't die when we leave. It blossoms in what we leave behind. Livia sobbed loudly, hugging the album tightly. Clara knelt down, letting her tears mix with the rain. Eduardo looked at the sky, murmuring a thank you to the wind. They walked back to the house in silence, wet, exhausted, and light. Marta collected the lanterns with the calm look of someone who had fulfilled a destiny. On the table, the empty envelope and the open safe remained like relics. She always knew what she was doing, Eduardo said. And that night, everyone slept with their hearts at peace for the first time. The next dawn brought a different silence, that of serenity. The sun filtered through the curtains, calmly gilding the air. The rain had stopped, but the still damp ground exuded the scent of new life. Livia woke up first, her chest feeling lighter than ever. In the garden, small flowers were sprouting where they had dug the night before. Clara walked down the stairs slowly, with slow, thoughtful steps. He looked around the house, now more alive, more breathing. Eduardo was having coffee with Marta, chuckling softly at some memory. She sat with them, saying nothing, just listening. It was as if every simple gesture was a silent prayer. She left something else, didn't she? Clara asked. Marta smiled from the corner of her mouth, opening her leather bag. From there, he took out a small diary covered in floral fabric. It was hers. She asked me to stay with her until you were ready. Eduardo received him with reverence, almost as if holding a life. The pages contained short excerpts written over the past few months. She spoke of the fear of dying alone, but also of the hope in her children. They will understand when love speaks louder than pride. Clara felt tears fall onto the yellowed pages. She believed in us until the end, he murmured, his voice trembling. Livia held her hand, smiling through her tears. And she was right, Eduardo added, looking at the two of them. The will wasn't about money. It was about love and remembering who we are. Marta nodded, her eyes teary and serene. Clara got up and went to the window. Outside, the garden glistened in the morning sun. The flowers, once wilted, were full of life and color. She took a deep breath and said softly, "Now I understand what she wanted." Eduardo smiled, proud of his sister who was finally softening. Marta stood up and handed Clara one last key. She asked you to open the safe in her room. alone. Clara looked at the small golden key, her heart racing. He climbed the stairs, the floor creaking under his hesitant feet. Each step seemed to lead to a reunion with the past. In the bedroom, the sun illuminated the white sheets and the dressing table. Clara opened the locked drawer and found a small box. Inside was just a hair ribbon and a note. "You have always been the mirror of my strength, but strength also cries." She held the note to her chest and cried like a child. As the tears flowed, the wind blew in through the open window. The curtains swayed, sending the scent of lavender into the air. Clara smiled, feeling that somehow her mother was there. "I heard you, Mom. I finally heard you." And the sound of the living room clock struck 11 as an answer. When she came down, her brothers were waiting for her in the garden. She hugged Livia and Eduardo without needing to say anything. Marta watched from a distance, a calm smile on her face. The safe, the letters and the diary had served their purpose, and the will finally had spoken and healed them all. The next morning brought a peace that felt new. The farm breathed slowly, lightly, as if it exhaled forgiveness. Marta prepared coffee, while Clara and Livia tidied the garden. Eduardo watched everything with a discreet, calm smile. But something still remained to be said, the final delivery of the will. Dr. Alvaro arrived at noon, as promised. He was carrying a different briefcase, made of dark leather with a gold clasp. "The last document," he said in a deep voice, placing it on the table. Everyone sat in silence, their hearts heavy. Marta stood near the window, looking at the clear sky. Donna Helena left very specific instructions for this moment. Clara exchanged an apprehensive look with Eduardo. She wanted this reading to be done in front of everyone, including you, Marta. The nurse turned around, surprised, her eyes filled with tears. "From me?" she asked in disbelief. The lawyer nodded, adjusting his glasses. "Yes, and I believe the reason will now make sense." He opened the folder and began to read the new part of the will. "I leave the farm and all my remaining assets to the woman who cared for me when my children could not." A murmur of shock ran through the room. Livia put her hands to her mouth in disbelief. Eduardo leaned back in his chair, stunned and thoughtful. Clara stood still, her face pale and her gaze lost. Dr. Alvaro continued, "I leave to Marta, my friend and soul sister, the house where we were happy." The silence that followed was heavy, but not of anger, of understanding. Marta cried softly, holding back her tears as best she could. I never wanted anything more than to fulfill her promise." Livia stood up, walked over to her and hugged her. "And that's why you deserve everything she left." The nurse hugged her to her chest, overcome with emotion. Eduardo wiped his eyes, laughing through his tears. "She always did the unexpected, didn't she?" Clara still didn't say anything, her gaze fixed on the open letter, inside a whirlwind, pride, regret, gratitude, until finally he took a deep breath and stood up. "She knew what she was doing," Clara said, her voice firm and sweet. "If it were for money, she would have left us rich and empty." He looked at Marta, approaching slowly. "She chose you because you loved her when we didn't know." And for the first time, Clara smiled without pain. Dr. Alvaro closed the document and left in silence. The sun streamed in through the window, bathing the group in golden light. Marta wiped away her tears, still unable to believe what was happening. Eduardo put his hand on her shoulder and said, "This house is yours now, but she will always be our mother." At that moment, Donna Helena's inheritance ceased to be material. It became a bond, memory, and redemption. The house that was once silent now sheltered peace, and in the newly blooming flowers of the garden there seemed to be a new beginning. The mother, from somewhere unseen, smiled, as she always did. Dusk arrived, painting the sky orange and violet. The open windows let the wind in, light and warm. Clara walked along the balcony, observing the flower garden. Each petal seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "It's like she's still here," she muttered to herself. Livia joined her, holding 2 cups of tea. "I think so," he replied with a serene smile. Clara chuckled softly, accepting the drink. "All along I fought something that just wanted to love me. And now I understand that love is not charged for, it is learned." Eduardo appeared soon after, carrying a blanket over his shoulders. "Did you notice? The house even seems bigger now." "It's not the house, bro," said Livia. "It's us." He smiled, sitting down on the porch step. The distant sound of cicadas completed the peace of that moment. Clara looked at the two of them and took a deep breath. "I need to say something." Livia and Eduardo stared at her, attentive, silent. "I spent years blaming you and her, but it was always my fault." Her voice broke, but she continued, "And I apologize." Livia approached and hugged her with genuine tenderness. Eduardo joined them, forming a tight circle. "She would be proud to see this," he said emotionally. Clara smiled, her eyes filled with tears, her heart light. Maybe she's watching, maybe she never left. The wind picked up, swaying the curtains and the porch bell. The tinkling sound echoed like soft laughter from the past. The clouds gradually parted, revealing a clear, starry sky. Livia pointed to a brighter star above. "There, I bet that's her looking at us." Marta appeared at the door, with the album in her hands. "I brought something for you to see." He opened the book to the last page, a recent photo. It was the mother in the garden, holding 3 flowers, 1 red, 1 white and 1 yellow. "Each color represents you," Marta explained. "She chose it herself." The trio watched the image in reverent silence. The mother's face radiated peace, as if she knew the end of the story. Clara caressed the photo with her fingers, smiling. "So that's it. She taught us until the last second." Marta nodded, moved, discreetly wiping away a tear. The sun disappeared, giving way to a peaceful twilight. The first stars appeared, dotting the sky like promises. Livia closed the album and placed it on the counter. "Now the garden is ours, and so is love," Eduardo agreed, laughing lightly, "and without clauses in the will." Clara looked at the horizon and smiled, completely. For the first time, the silence on the farm didn't hurt. It welcomed. The wind brought the scent of flowers and an imaginary whisper, "I knew you would come back." And forgiveness finally completed the cycle that love began. Dawn arrived gently, dyeing the sky a soft gold. The flowers in the garden were open, shining with vivid colors. The farm, now clean and alive, seemed to breathe hope. Livia watered the plants while singing softly. Eduardo, on the balcony, read the newspaper with a serene smile. Clara came down the stairs, wearing her mother's light dress. The steps were calm, different from before. She carried a basket of flowers and a folded letter. "Today marks exactly 7 days since the last reading," he said. Livia and Eduardo understood. It was time to say goodbye. The 3 of them walked together to the garden under the gentle sunshine. The flowers swayed as if waving in gratitude. In the center, the old stone where Donna Helena used to sit. Clara placed the basket on top of it, along with the letter. "She always said that life fits into a well-made goodbye." Eduardo opened the letter carefully, the familiar handwriting leaping out. "My children, if you are reading this, it is because you listened to me until the end. Don't mourn what's gone, take care of what's left. And remember, a heart is only rich when it learns to forgive." The wind blew lightly, as if the mother herself was whispering the words. Livia cried softly, a smile between her tears. Eduardo held her hand, squeezing it affectionately. Clara, with tears in her eyes, read the rest in a trembling voice. "You are my greatest legacy, and love is the testament that never fades." The last words seemed to shine on the page, alive. A sweet silence settled in, made of remembrance and gratitude. The birds sang loudly, breaking the ancient morning of the house. Clara stood up and put the letter inside a small box. He buried her under the jasmine that had sprouted after the rain. So she remains here, blooming with us. Marta watched everything from the balcony with a maternal smile. "She would be proud of you," he said, his voice breaking. Eduardo replied, "I don't think she ever stopped being there." Livia nodded, wiping away her tears. And her will was love, all the time. The sun rose higher, gilding the countryside and the memories. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the warm, clean air. That house, once filled with silence, was now home to laughter and life. "I'll stay here," he said. "I want to tend the garden, like she did." Livia smiled, moved. "Then the farm is in good hands." As everyone was going back inside, a girl appeared at the gate. He carried a simple envelope with the seal of a distant notary's office. "They told me to give it to Donna Helena's family," he said timidly. Clara took the envelope, intrigued. On the back, just one sentence. The second part of the story. The three looked at each other, their hearts racing once more. Eduardo laughed nervously. Livia put her hand to her mouth, surprised. Clara took a deep breath, a smile slowly forming. It seems the will hasn't finished speaking yet. And under the bright sunlight, the new letter waited to begin another story. And so ends the story of Donna Helena, a mother who, even after her departure, still found a way to teach the true value of love and forgiveness. If this story touched you in any way, stay tuned. Each video offers a new perspective on feelings that deep down we all carry. Take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. That way, you can continue following stories like this, which speak to the heart and make you think. And if you felt that connection during the video, leave a like. It shows that this kind of story still resonates with you too. Now, before you go, take a look at the next video that's appearing on the screen. I'm sure it will captivate you from the first few seconds, and maybe even remind you of someone special.